I think there's an assumption a lot of times when it comes to burnout, when it comes to working too hard. The assumption is people burn out because they work too many hours. And you can work too many hours, right? Like a human being can only work so many hours.
That's
but
right.
People, for the most part, don't burn out because they work too many hours, do they?
Not most of them. Some of them, yes. But most people, it's not because of the hours that they're working.
So how would you describe it then?
I would say that it's because they're spending their hours doing the wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
So if God has created you, I mean, you're gifted as an apostle, and so am I. And so you and I can...
I wouldn't say I am apostle.
Yeah,
I got apostolic tendencies, right?
Yeah, we're not saying...
I want to be on the front lines of creating new stuff.
Taking new ground. We're not getting into all that weird stuff around.
Okay, I didn't want anybody... I didn't want anybody to say we're heretics.
We're not touching all the theological
I don't
stuff
have apostle
that.
In front of my name.
Right,
okay.
yeah. Neither do I. Nor would I want to.
But we're both wired that way.
That we are.
Yeah.
We want to take ground.
Yep.
And so if we're doing those kinds of things, then we're going to have massive energy for that. Mm-hmm. But then there are other things that we're not as gifted to do. And if we're spending the same amount of time doing those things that we're not gifted, it's going to be just draining energy out of us. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to feel like we're working way more hours than what we really are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go.
All right. Hey, welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast. My name is Pastor Bobby, and I am super pumped to be here with Pastor Jonathan Yarbrough, the albino rhino. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks. Wore the white shirt today just for the occasion.
Awesome. How you doing, man?
I am doing fantastic. Excited to have this conversation today.
Good. Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good one. So, with Breaking Barriers, we're really all about helping pastors grow, helping churches grow.
Yep.
And, man, we're kind of going at that from so many different ways, right? I mean, sometimes a lot of what we do at Breaking Barriers is just offering people tactics and plans, how to grow, super in the weeds. Other times we're really trying to engage maybe how we think or our beliefs, if we have limiting beliefs. And a lot of times with leaders, and this is just my personal experience, sometimes early on being a leader, early on being a pastor, like you can get a real high ROI from some of those tactics of, man, you could be doing counseling better. You could be doing preaching better. They're kind of basic tactics to help you grow.
Small tweaks you can make. They're just huge ROI.
Right.
Yep.
As you grow in leadership, and you really think about almost anything, you think about professional sports, right? Like all of those guys, when they get to like the professional level, they all have the tactics, right? They all have good coaching, good plan, good tactics. But what's the thing that separates all of them? It's what's going on in here.
Yeah, how they think about it.
Yeah, it's what's going on in their mind, any sort of courage, limiting beliefs, a belief in their self, belief that they can't do it. Those are the things that can begin to separate people. And so today, I want to talk about a belief that I see that I think can hold a lot of pastors and hold a lot of churches back from growing. And it is this limiting belief. It's this framework that, man, to see movement, to see my church grow, to start new services, to start new campuses, to see all of this movement, that is going to lead to burnout. Or that's going to lead to burning my staff out, or I'm going to have to sacrifice, the relationship with my wife or the relationship with my family, or I'm going to have to inherently be more unhealthy for me to go to that place to be able to grow the church in that way.
Like the church growing requires you to sacrifice yourself on that altar.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I say it's a limiting belief because, one, I actually just don't think it's true.
Yeah.
You certainly can burn yourself out in ministry.
It's more than a limiting belief. It's a wrong belief.
Yeah. I say limiting belief, though, and the way that I think about limiting beliefs is limiting beliefs are frameworks that we think through this framework, and then it affects what we end up doing.
Yeah.
So if we have this limiting belief, man, anything over 10% growth in the church, that's going to lead to burnout. Well, if God starts moving and you need to launch another service, or you need to do a giving initiative and raise money, or you need to launch a campus, and you have this limiting framework,
Then
you
you're-
may just end
you're
up
gonna
not
be-
doing it.
You're going to be trying to like throw the wet blanket on that thing just so that you don't get to a place of burnout.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have, I've heard this from so many people over the years, church planners, pastors. I'll just kind of share some examples
All right.
on the front end. I don't know how many times over the last 15 years I'll hear, a story, be talking to a lead pastor, typically a church planner, and they're talking about, man, this is what God's doing in our church. God has brought these college students and we're seeing people get baptized. There's all this momentum in our church. And then I will say, or Pastor Andrew will say, or one of our staff will say, man, that's awesome. You guys need to X. You guys need to launch another service.
Right.
Hey, man, it sounds like you guys are going to have to get into a bigger space. You guys need to go find a bigger space. Or, man, it sounds like, man, God's moving. It sounds like you guys need to go do a generosity initiative.
It's something that's about harnessing the momentum that's there and turning it into even more.
Exactly.
But that's not what they're looking for.
Well, they're excited about what God's doing,
Right.
but so quickly, that suggestion of launching another service or doing whatever, so quickly it's been met with, well, man, I don't want to burn my staff out, so I just don't think it's the right time for that.
Yeah.
Or, I don't think we could do that. I think that's gonna be too hard on me, or that's gonna, whatever. I can't do, no, my kids are playing sports and time with family. There's no way I can do a generosity initiative or whatever. Like my health is going to suffer or whatever. And it's like,
cost too much. Yeah.
Maybe that's true, but it may totally not be true at all.
Right.
But they've created this framework of like, man, they're thinking through this framework of growth will lead to burnout.
Right.
And so any opportunity maybe to grow or, really throw gas on the fire of what God's doing, they just have this limiting framework.
Got it.
Have you had examples of that, like over the years in ministry, where you hear people throw that up very quickly?
Sure. I've had lots of experiences where, people get into a growth cycle. Things are pushing hard. The staff is starting to redline, and people come to a place where they got to make a decision. Hey, are we going to continue harnessing what God is doing here, or are we going to tap the brakes a little bit for the sake of, keeping everybody healthy or whatever? As if you can't continue to grow and continue the momentum and also stay healthy at the same time. They seem to think that it's going to require sacrificing that. So yeah, I've seen that happen a whole bunch of times.
Yeah, and I think for some people, because I've been here, what I'm about to say, and I think you probably have too. I think for some people, I certainly have gone the route of God is moving. We're doing everything we can to keep up, and I've burned out.
Yeah. We even say oftentimes kind of in this half joking way, hey, when you've got momentum, cancel your vacation.
Right.
Stuff like that.
So I have the wounds from that.
Yeah.
I got the scars from that. Like I've seen the church grow. I've tried to chase that, and I have burned out.
Yeah.
So for some people, that's where they get the framework, like because they've gone through it.
There is truth to it. That if you don't handle it the right way, both of us have gotten to the place like that. We've just hit the wall.
Yeah.
And it's like, now we have to stop.
Right.
Yeah,
and I've gotten there multiple times. Yeah. But the more I've thought about it and the more that I've matured and the more I've been around a lot of different leaders at a lot of different levels, I think one of the things I have learned is like, man, inherent to growth is not necessarily burnout.
That's right.
I think, there's some other issues most of the time related to burnout, like our leadership capacity, or our ability to hand leadership over to other people or disciple other people. But I think we too quickly just equate, growth equals burnout.
That's right.
And before I get into what we're going to walk through today is some things to maybe help people overcome this way of thinking, but then just some real practical ways of like, okay, when your church is growing, when your leadership is growing, when God has blessed you with more stuff to steward, what are some things you could do to make sure you don't burn out?
This is going back to some of the tactic stuff that you were talking about at the beginning, where people can just make some adjustments to what they're doing, and then that can lead to how they begin to think about it differently.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me say too, on the front end, I don't know if there's a correlation between larger churches and burnout or smaller churches and burnout, because you certainly see small church pastors burn out because they're doing everything.
Yeah.
And you see pastors of really large churches burn out.
Yeah.
But I will say this, like, I do think in larger churches, when God is really moving, if you have some of the underlying unhealthy things that would lead to burnout,
it's going to bring it right to the surface.
you are going to be a kid in a candy shop.
Absolutely.
So some of those things, I think, maybe you have an idol of control in ministry, and when your church begins to grow and there are so many more things than you can do, and that idol of control starts saying, okay, I got to do it all. I got to control it all. If you have that tendency, that is only going to be exponentially, kind of pushed on in terms of when the church grows.
Or
what else?
I think if you're a person that puts your value in what you're accomplishing, then that can turn into the same kind of thing. Because in a larger church setting where everything is fast-paced and there's all kinds of opportunities where you have the opportunity to turn all kinds of things into success, it just feeds that beast. And so it's like the more you get, the more you want. And so it's hard to slow that thing down. Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe another one too is like if you're doing ministry and deep down there's this fear of man or this deep desire for acceptance.
Yeah. I mean, there's some way that all of us get into this with this deep-rooted thing where we want to please people, make people happy and all that. And so we've got to figure out how to control that, how to speak to that so that it doesn't take control of us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Like, you just think of some of the books that have been written over the years about like the dangers of being in vocational ministry. There are real dangers in terms of, pride and some of the things in terms of our heart, fear of man, wanting to please people and all of that. But the answer has to be, okay, let's deal with our heart. Let's deal with our character. Let's deal with our leadership. The answer can't be, I just don't want ministry to happen.
Right.
I don't want God to move.
Yeah.
Because if God moves, I'm going to burn out because I have all these issues going on inside.
Yeah. That's like self-preservation and sabotaging the ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I would just say on the front end, before we share some of the real practical things, if someone is dealing with this, if someone constantly wants to throw up, like I said, hey, God's moving XYZ, you should do this, and you throw up so quickly, oh man, I'm going to burn out. I'm going to burn out my staff. You just may need to shift that completely, because I just think about, there were times in the Bible, you think about like God bringing the Israelites, out of Egypt. So many times they wanted to go back to what was known, and they struggle with the unknown.
Yeah.
They didn't want to go into the unknown. But I mean, we look now and we're like, man, God was going to grow them. God was going to test their faith. God was going to test them.
What was unknown to them at that time was so much better.
100%.
Yeah.
You think about Jesus saying like, man, come and like, man, let me take on your burden, because here's my burden, it's my burden's light, like let's not be so quick to say, oh man, that's going to burn me out or that can't happen.
Right.
The other thing I would say too, and I've seen this so many times, how do you know who God is going to raise up in your midst to shoulder some of this with you?
Right.
Now, if you just say, I'm not going to do it because it's going to burn everybody out, and you just put a full stop on the front end, well, you're never going to see.
You're not even given that opportunity.
No, you're not going to see who God maybe will have raised up, So I just want to call people to have a little bit more faith on the front end. Let's not be so quick to say, man, if this happens, it's going to burn me out. So, all right, hey, let's get into some real practical things that have helped over the years. Myself, I feel like I've touched that line of burnout 3 or 4 pretty significant times. And when I look back on my own life, And obviously, knowing other people that have been involved with fast-growing churches and have been in ministry, you've been in ministry over 20 years. I've walked alongside a lot of other brothers that have burned out or have touched that line.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to draw out some things that I've seen and some practical ways to maybe help people.
Yeah.
All right. So number one, stay in the lane of your gifts. I think there's an assumption a lot of times when it comes to burnout, when it comes to working too hard, the assumption is people burn out because they work too many hours. And you can work too many hours, right? Like a human being can only work so many hours.
That's
but
right.
People, for the most part, don't burn out because they work too many hours, do they?
Not most of them. Some of them, yes. But most people, it's not because of the hours that they're working.
So how would you describe it then?
I would say that it's because they're spending their hours doing the wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
So if God has created you, I mean, you're gifted as an apostle, and so am I. And so you and I can.
I wouldn't say I am apostle.
Yeah,
I got apostolic tendencies, right?
Yeah, we're not saying
I want to be on the front lines of creating new stuff,
taking new ground. We're not getting into all that weird stuff around.
Okay, I didn't want anybody.
apostleship
I
or
didn't want
anything
anybody
like
to say we're heretics.
We're not touching all the theological.
I don't
stuff
have
around
apostle
that.
in front of my name.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Neither do I. Nor would I want to.
But we're both wired that way.
That we are.
Yeah.
We want to take ground.
Yep.
And so if we're doing those kinds of things, then we're going to have massive energy for that.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are other things that we're not as gifted to do. And if we're spending the same amount of time doing those things that we're not gifted, it's going to be just draining energy out of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's going to feel like we're working way more hours than what we really are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about some different tools. I mean, there's just a straight spiritual side of this, right? I mean, the Bible talks about spiritual gifts. I mean, there's evangelists, there's prophets, there's teachers. Like, we're wired differently. There's all these different gifts in the Bible. So, like, man, we got to be operating in those gifts,
Yep.
And then there's a real natural side of these things too. I mean, there's personality tests.
Sure.
We use StrengthsFinder stuff at
Right.
Mercy Hill. Kind of describe maybe what that looks like to kind of work in the lane of your gifts versus trying to do something that maybe is not really where you thrive.
Sure. So, like for me, for example, one of the classic tales, back when I was doing college ministry, I got into this place where I was counseling a whole bunch of students, like sitting in an office with them one-on-one, and I started counting it up, and I was getting to a place where I was like doing 30 hours a week of that just one-on-one stuff, and it was absolutely terrible. I go to this other pastor.
Some people probably love that.
That's where I'm going. This other pastor that I talked to, he was like, can I come volunteer some of my time to help you lift some of that, And I'm like, yeah, because it was just like crushing me, So, I mean, that was one of those examples. And it shows where you're talking about, we just have no idea what God is going to raise up around us when we start stepping out of some of those things that we're not good at doing,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think we all, like, if you list all the different stuff you do in ministry, there's going to be stuff where you're like, as soon as you write down on the paper, you're like, I love doing that.
That's right.
For some people it's counseling. For some people it's preaching. I mean, there's people that love organizational stuff because God's given them like a legit spiritual gift of administration.
Setting up files.
People love that.
Yeah.
For other people, it's going to be like super draining.
Mm-hmm.
And so under this first point, stay in the lane of your gifts, I would just say, man, not all hours are created the same.
Right.
Like, we have a legit capacity of how many hours we could probably work, right? And that's going to be different for everybody. But I will tell you, man, working 8 hours in your lane versus 8 hours of something you're not great at, man, that's...
One of those is going to deplete you way
oh my
more
goodness.
than
It's
the other.
going to feel so different.
That's right.
The second one I would say is just this idea of like an 80-20 principle. So the 80-20 principle, I mean, this has existed for a long time, and people use it to explain lots of different things, economics, all sorts of different things. But the basic idea of the 80-20 principle is, 20% of your effort is the thing that's going to lead to like 80% of the outcomes. And I mean, if you take that principle and you apply it to so many, you could see it, man, 20% of the people really serve, 20% of the people give 80% of the gifts. Like, this 80-20 principle plays out in so many different areas of life. But the basic idea is there are only certain things you do that are going to move the needle in a way that other things you do, even though you think they're important, are not going to move the needle.
Yeah. A lot of those things that aren't going to move the needle as much fit in the category of like urgent.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I love is starting at the beginning of the week and using a tool like a planner where I look at all the things mapped out that I'm supposed to accomplish that week. And then I look at them and say, which ones of these are the ones that are actually going to make the biggest difference? And they're the ones that I can uniquely do, that other people around me probably couldn't do these things. But when I do these things, it's going to make a massive impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And just try to, think about like, okay, what are like really high leveraged tasks that I can do? Mm-hmm. Because the reality is like, okay, you think about like when someone new comes into your church, right? Like you could sit with every single new person and spend 3 hours of walking every single new person through your whole leadership. Here's what we believe. Here's what the church is about. And maybe when you're super small, that's fine, right?
Right.
As the church grows, you probably can't individually do that with every person, nor do you even need to do that. You could create a more high leverage task. Hey, what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to get, this is very biblical. You think about the 100, the 12, the 3. I'm going to get a group of people together, and I'm going to take this group of people through this. That's a more leverage task,
That's
right?
That's right.
You're doing the same teaching. You're doing the same vision, the same communication.
It's when it multiplies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think you got to be thinking about like, okay, what are things as the church grows? What are things that I can do to, leverage my time in a way that's more strategic?
I think sometimes when you're in a smaller church situation, you can think that all of the tasks have to be yours as a pastor. Mm-hmm. But if you're doing a good job of making disciples and raising up other leaders around you, then it makes it to where you can give away some of these things or start to leverage other leaders to have a bigger impact. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah, and that's why I said at the beginning, I mean, man, this is a hard truth to swallow, but I have been there. I think so much of burnout is related to, man, it's leadership. Mm-hmm. Like, you're not leading in the way that you should.
Because even when it comes to leading yourself. So, I mean, you got to think about it's leading other people, so how you're raising up people around you. But then it's also how you're leading your own life and how you're setting up boundaries and those kinds of things around it.
Yeah, 100%. I would say, too, related to this 80-20 principle, have you identified the 3 or 4 most important things that God is calling you to do in your job?
Ooh.
Because like, man, I mean, think about it. Like, man, when you're being paid, I know not everybody listening to this is being paid to do ministry, but if you're in vocational ministry and you're being paid, people are giving, and you're wanting to steward the fact that people want you to be in vocational ministry.
Right.
You're being paid to do ministry. You better think long and hard about like, man, what are the 3 or 4 most important things in my role? Because we're all going to have different roles.
Right.
In my role that God wants me to do,
And the hard part about that, the really hard part, is when you start to realize what's not in those 3 or 4 things. All the things that you're currently doing that you think are really, really important, and you have to start letting some of those things go. Mm-hmm. Man, that can be a really difficult stripping away kind of exercise for you to realize I have to let some of this go and trust other people to do these things. Mm-hmm. That can be difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I would say the third one, there's lots of different ways to say this, but to not burn out as something grows, we have to delegate and we have to elevate.
Yeah.
So we have to become a higher level leader because we're calling others up into leadership, right? I mean, this is so biblical. This is discipleship. This is biblical, right? When we go from, hey, I'm leading a community group, to now I'm actually gonna, as a pastor, be coaching multiple community groups. I'm gonna raise this person up in my community group to now be leading this community group. See what we've done? We've delegated. Hey, I'm no longer leading the group.
Right.
I'm teaching you to do it. I'm now elevating so that I'm coaching multiple community groups. I'm just giving this as one example.
Right.
But that's what it looks like to, man, delegate what you're doing, teach somebody else, and elevate to that next level.
ideally, the people that you're delegating to will also be wired to do those things, and they'll get great fulfillment from the things you're delegating to them.
Yeah.
That's the best situation.
Yeah, totally. I think about like, one of the most common stories in the Old Testament is like Moses and Jethro.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like what happens there? He's basically, Jethro's like, bro, he's an older man. He's like, man, you're taking all of this on yourself. Like you're doing it all. Like you got to adjudicate every single case. Like he's like, why don't you find some people that are wise, that can make good decisions? Why don't they share this load with you?
Yeah.
Like
he even says, this is not good. What
right.
you're doing, right? Yeah.
100%, So like, I don't know, man. Like, man, to me, it's like, I know it's easier to be on the outside looking in and see when somebody else is not doing this.
Oh yeah.
Than when you're not doing it yourself.
It's really hard to look inward. Yeah.
But it's like, the way I think about it, it's like, man, this is discipleship,
Yeah.
And and that's why I say, I think at the core of a lot of burnout is like, man, we're just not raising up enough leaders and discipling people to help carry the load.
Yeah. And the irony there is, if there isn't growth, then it doesn't produce the same kind of need for disciples to be raised up.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like one feeds the other, but we usually pit them against each other.
Yeah. And I have felt, and it took me some time to be able to put my finger on this, because there's going to be times, let's say somebody's listening to this where they're leading multiple staff members, right?
Yeah.
And you come to that staff member and you're like, hey, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And they don't want to do it, because they feel like, oh man, that's going to crush me. I'm going to be crushed by that. I can't handle that. That's too big of a task for me. Maybe it is. But a lot of times what's actually going on is they realize, wait a minute, I'm going to have to become a better leader
to be able to do this,
to be able to handle what it is you're trying to get me to handle.
Yeah. Which is going to require me to delegate some of these things I'm doing to someone else so that I can elevate into this space that you're asking me to step into.
And I can't, man, I could share so many examples of people that I sat across from, or even a team of people on our staff, and they were a little reticent. I don't know that we could do that. I don't know that we could do that on that timeline. And then to see what God got out of them.
Right.
Right. And to see them grow to that next level of leadership, so that, the thing that they were really fearful of doing, they're no longer fearful of doing, and God is, being glorified because he got something out of them that they didn't think was possible.
Yeah.
And so I think as leaders, like, yeah, I mean, we don't want to burn people out. Like, I'm never going to ask people to work 80 hours or anything like that.
No.
But I think a lot of times in our leadership culture, we really lean towards that side of like, man, let's not burn anybody out. But I think we need to kind of like veer back towards like, man, let's challenge people, because it's in that, right? It's in the crucible of that is where people grow a lot of times. And let's not lean so hard on like, well, let's just not burn people out,
Yeah. You're not saying let's shift from let's not burn people out to let's go burn as many people out as possible. You're saying let's shift away from protecting everybody to simply saying, hey, let's call people to more and help them become better leaders.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. The fourth one, there's probably lots of different ways of saying this, but we say it this way a lot around Mercy Hill. Like, man, in your life, you've got to just put the big rocks in first. You want to explain to everybody what that means?
Yeah, so if you start with all the little rocks in your life, those are the things that aren't as important. They're the things that they may be the things that we want to put in first because we like them more or something like that. And so we put the small rocks in the jar first. And then what happens is you're left with the larger rocks, the ones that are super, super important, and they don't fit in the jar anymore. So you end up putting in the small things, like maybe the time that you're spending, working in your garage on some car, or you've got some project that you're doing at the house, or you've got some side thing that you're working on over here. But when it comes to the big things in your life, like your relationship with your wife, the time that you're spending with God, taking care of your health, making sure that you get sleep at night, all of a sudden you end up not being able to fit those things into your life. And when that happens, you got a problem.
For sure. Yeah. Man, the crazy thing to me too, because we've all done this, right? We have all done this where the stress comes because there's busyness, there's schedules, there's all this stuff going on. And we have a tendency in that time to make more unhealthy decisions around our health.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stay up later watching TV. I'm vegging out, so I'm gonna get less sleep. Man, there's something in me that's telling me, man, eat the dessert, eat the chips, be lax on your diet because you're stressed and you need that to cope.
Dude, not gonna lie, that meeting yesterday, we were in that thing for 8 hours. I get home last night. I kid you not.
I'm with you. I know.
My
exactly.
wife. I went in the cabinet, and there was a bag of Doritos sitting in there, and I wanted that bag of Doritos so bad. It was so hard to say no to that thing, but I knew that if I did it, it wasn't gonna be good today.
But here's the thing, man. We can't pit being in an 8-hour meeting or the busyness of ministry. We cannot pit that against being healthy.
Right.
Because, man, this idea of like putting in the big rocks first, to me, this is like Jesus's ministry. I mean, you see him doing this all the time. It's like, man, there's times you go in the Gospels and it's like you start counting the hours and it's like that looked like it was about a 15-hour day that Jesus just did. You know what I mean? I mean, he's staying up till midnight doing the teaching.
But he's balanced.
But my point is there's times where Jesus is like, you know what? Man, I'm getting up early. I'm going to pray.
That's right.
Like I'm putting the big rocks in first. Mm-hmm. I'm focusing on what's most important first. And I'm not going to it's not, hey, I'm going to take a month off so that I can go do this. It's like, no, in the chaos of everyday life, man, I'm going to put the big rocks in first. That's right. I know something for me that was helpful. I did this. We're in 2024. I did this at the beginning of last year. Mm-hmm. I tried to identify just some basic things in my life that were kind of those big rocks, stuff like, man, I want to read a chapter of the Bible with my kids every day in the morning.
That's awesome.
We want to have a basic prayer prompt that we pray together as a family. I want to work out once a day. If we can, I want to eat dinner together as a family. Mm-hmm. The funny thing is when I made a list of things, it was like 6 or 7 things.
Yeah.
I went and added up the time it took to do all those things. It was like less than an hour.
Wow.
Things that I was putting as a marker for health in my life, they didn't take a ton of time.
Yeah, they weren't the time sucks.
No, like it's just not that hard to get up in the morning and say, you know what, before I do anything else, I'm going to read my Bible. Yeah. I'm going to pray. Man, it's not always glamorous, and you don't always feel great or whatever, but it's just like, I'm just going to put in the most important things first.
It's like establishing a rhythm that I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this.
Yep.
And it starts to just compound upon itself.
Yeah, the way that I think about it is like, man, as many disciplines, so discipline is like something you have to make yourself do. Yep. Discipline is like not something you do naturally. As many disciplines you can move from discipline to habit in your life, then you can create some healthy rhythms so that when you're busy, you still eat healthy.
That's right.
When you're busy, you still get sleep. When you're busy, you still whatever.
Because it's a habit.
Exactly.
Yeah. It would be hard to stop doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even like spending time with your spouse. It's like you don't got to spend like 3 hours a day, like talking about the deepest stuff that's going on. Like even just spending 20 minutes of really focused time a lot of times, like, man, you could create some quality time there.
Yeah.
But it's just all about being strategic with your time. The very last one, and I didn't really know how to word this one, but in ministry, when there's always more to do than we can do, we have to live out of vision and calling, meaning we're not always just reacting. Talk about that a little bit.
So when we talk about that kind of stuff, think about getting interrupted. Mm-hmm. So you're caught up in the ministry, you're doing the things that you're supposed to do, and somebody is going to want you to do something different, or somebody's going to want something more. You've put the rocks in your life, you've set the trajectory, you're moving along, and you've kind of got this groove that's going on. Now, sometimes there's going to be interruptions that happen that you just got to take care of. It's like a legitimate crisis kind of situation.
Yeah.
But sometimes, most of the time even, it's going to be something that just isn't quite as important as what everybody thinks it is. And so when those kind of interruptions come along, how are you going to respond to that? I love this. You know the book that Wayne Cordero wrote. It's called "Leading on Empty." I mean,
that's a good resource for anybody.
It's a great
around
book,
this topic.
Deals with all this burnout stuff. It's fantastic. But he talks about one of the big things that happened in his life was he had this dream, and he's not one of these guys that goes, "I had a dream," and so that like all these different spiritual things happen in dreams. He was like, "But this one happened, and I knew that it meant something in my life." And he tells the story that this dream goes about this farmer. And so he dreams about this farmer and his family, and they have this small farm, but it's really good crops and really good stuff they're producing. And people are coming from all over the place to partake of the goods that are there. But it comes a certain time in the day when all of a sudden what they're wanting, whether it's the milk, whether it's the eggs, whether it's the turnips, whatever it is,
he's out.
It's done. And so he says to him, "You can come back tomorrow and I'll have some more." Right? I just love that. And so you can get kind of the concept where we're doing our thing, people come to interrupt, and we got to be able to say, "Hey, no, I'm done. But if you come back tomorrow, I'll have some left for you tomorrow."
Yeah, and the way that I think about it is having a very deep sense of what God has specifically called us to do in our specific ministry role. You know, I shared earlier, like, you know, you just think about, okay, in vocational ministry, like you're being paid to do ministry, right?
Yeah.
And like at Mercy Hill, we have a directional elder board, you know, the church gives, we have a staff of 75, and it's like, it's not like, oh man, we're just paid to just randomly do whatever ministry that we want to do. It's like, no, we're paid for a specific task, you know? And I think about like Pastor Andrew, for example, it's like a lot of what, you know, he's doing in vocational ministry is like, you know, preaching and vision casting. And it's like, man, can he be interrupted? Like, yeah, sure. You know, like there's a place for that, but he better be focused on like what God has called him to do, you know? And I just think like sometimes we need a better sense of what those things are.
There was a time in my life back again when I was doing some college ministry, and I ended up doing a lot of the wrong things. The things that I'm not saying they were like wrong as in like immoral. I'm just saying they weren't the things I should have been doing, where I should have been spending my time, and things got kind of out of whack. And so here I am. I've got all these people that are coming up to me after I've preached at this service, and they're wanting to get some time with me to talk about the message and how it applies to their lives. They got this issue that's going on and all that. And next thing you know, you're spending this absorbent amount of time. Well, I call up one of my mentors, and you know, he had been a pastor for a long time. And I said, "Hey, how do you handle this?" And he said, "Well, first, I just don't take my phone to the worship service. And that way, if they want to schedule something with me, I don't even have a calendar. So you can't even do that. And they have to do that through my assistant. And I tell my assistant, hey, make them wait 2 weeks when they call." And so what that does is most of the time, by the time the 2 weeks is gone by, they don't really have a problem anymore anyway. So it's like takes care of like 75% of the issues. And so it meant for him, is it bad for him to be spending time with people that are in need like that? No. Is it bad for him to be spending all of his time with people that are like having those kinds of crises that are going to pass in a couple of days anyway, and they're not that big of a deal? Well, yeah, it would be bad for him to be doing that because it would mean that he couldn't do the other things that were way more important for what his job was.
Yeah, that's the key part.
Yeah.
And you know, because somebody can hear, 2 weeks or the assistant or whatever, and it's like, that seems awful. But it's like, man, this is the model that you have in Jesus' ministry.
That's right.
No doubt. Like, there are times where Jesus absolutely was willing to be interrupted. He was willing to stop.
Yep.
He had enough space. He had enough margin. There were other times where he's like, no.
That's right.
I'm going over here.
That's
like,
right.
you know, I'm preaching the Sermon on the Mount, or I'm doing this thing over here. Like, no, like, you're not going to be able to stop me. Like, I'm not
We're rolling. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I'm not like a slot machine, you know, where you just put some money in and like, man, I need some ministry.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, maybe, but he had a calling, you know, that he was living out. He had a mission.
That's right.
That he was doing, you know? So hopefully these will be helpful for people. I mean, I think we could circle back to this a lot. Because the last thing I would say, and maybe you and I could both be a little vulnerable here at the end, is like balance, because we say balance, we need balance.
Right.
Like balance is a myth. You need to always be balancing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you think about trying to actually balance on something.
Yep.
You can never have like pure balance, you know, like you think about you're riding a bike or something like that. You're always constantly balancing.
I mean, even when you go to take a step, to just move forward.
You got to balance.
Yeah, and you almost have to like throw yourself off balance. Like the momentum of your body has to start moving so that then you can catch yourself again with the next step. Yeah.
So I think like as we close, when we're balancing, we need to go back to some of these principles, you know, and be like, okay, I'm feeling a little off here, right? Like, man, too much time at work, not enough time at home.
Yeah.
Or too much stress here, I'm not investing enough here.
Right.
And so we need to go back through some of these. Hey, am I in the lane of my gifts?
Yep.
You know, can I raise somebody else up?
Yep.
You know, discipleship. You know, am I fearing too much what people think? And I got to try to figure out how can I get back in balance. And then I just will say, because you and I have both just been through hard seasons in our life. You know, like I lost my little brother passed away almost 3 years ago, and in the couple years since then, it's been harder for me to balance because I have a weight of that I'm dealing with that in the whole balancing act, there's this emotional weight, and I may not have as much energy for certain things as I have in the past. So it's just recognizing like, man, this is a constant week to week. It's not a problem to solve. It's life.
I like the way Pastor Andrew talks about it can put you into walking with a limp. It's not that you have to stop, but when you have these things that happen in your life, it changes the way you move forward from there on. So you may be carrying a limp, you know, like, you know, we went through some difficult stuff with our family, and what I discovered was that I would tend to avoid what was going on with some of the things at home, and that meant that I was not investing there the way that I should. And it meant that I started slipping on things like how much, making sure that I was spending time with God, those kinds of things. And so next thing you know, I'm throwing myself into work that gets rewarded and praised and all this kind of stuff, and everybody's loving it. You know, I'm doing all this ministry stuff, and meanwhile, it's just crushing me because I'm not putting the big rocks in first, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was huge for me. So I think these things that we've laid out here, you know, if people can just get their head around that, start practicing some of that, it can set some safeguards around their ministry so that they can continue to move forward and push forward.
Yeah, 100%. Man, great discussion. I think it's going to be a really, hopefully helpful podcast for people. I would just say as I close, you know, man, question that assumption that growth or God moving in your church is going to necessarily lead to burnout, because I don't think it's necessarily true.
Yeah, I don't either.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks.